Hello, everybody. My name's Kid Ramos. I play the guitar and a few other instruments, mostly guitar. And you're listening to Talking Blues.
Can I assume that the name Kid came from your early days with James Harmon, or does that name come from somewhere else?
It did come from the early days of James Harmon. I mean, my grandfather had a nickname. Some of the guys in his shop would call him Kid Ramos, and he told me about it. And it just kind of stuck with me because I was playing with guys in their 20s when I was 15 years old. So it was one of those things that just kind of stuck. And when I told James Harmon about it, he liked nicknames. He liked something that was a little more interesting than just David Ramos. So that's kind of the nemesis of how it all you know was created, I suppose.
You come from an interesting family background where your stepfather and your mother were both opera singers.
Correct.
Well, tell me how that influenced you musically.
Well, my stepdad was really the first person I saw playing guitar because he also played classical guitar and sang, accompanied himself, and sang popular songs as well as opera. So my mom and he would go and perform in Italian restaurants. He was in the Metropolitan Opera when my mom met him, and then they got married, and he quit traveling, and he came home and he started a gas station. He bought a gas station in Anaheim and started doing that. And so my mom and he would go and perform in different places and light opera and civic opera, community theater and stuff like that. They did, and they had friends that were in the business, so they would go with them and perform in different places. And they would take us, my brother and myself, with them. And my stepdad was the singing bartender at a restaurant in Los Angeles called La Strada, and he would make these little Shirley Temple, Roy Rogers drinks for my brother and I with little plastic monkeys, and we'd sit at the bar, and they'd all these people, colorful, interesting people, would come in there and sing, and they had a stage on. It was a very, very interesting place. The guy that ran the place was like out of central casting, looked like a mafia character, Italian guy, and my mom's full blooded Italian, and my dad is Mexican, so I kind of had both of those cultures growing up. But my stepdad was an Italian from the Bronx in New York, and so he kind of brought all that with him too. So he was a very colorful character, quite different from my father, and so he became a big influence in my life because he just was so interesting, and he looked like Tony Curtis, and he just was had a big personality. And so I would see him and my mom singing, and then he would play acoustic guitar. So my first real guitar that I got, real guitar, it was a $5 guitar, was a nylon string guitar I bought off of a friend of mine in junior high school. And my stepdad showed me the first few chords, and that kind of went from there.
What kind of music did you first get into?
Well, I heard the Beatles when the Beatles came out. I remember the Beatles very vividly, and I had cousins that had records, and we had big family, so we would go and spend holidays together and people's birthdays, and I would go into their room and play records, and whatever they had, I'd listen to records. I just thought watching a record go around and listening to music was fascinating to me, and the Beatles were just, to me, were unbelievable. As a 6-year-old kid, 7 years old, I vividly remember just being enthralled by that. And so we just listen to records, and then once I started playing guitar, I was instantly influenced by blues music, and I don't know why really. Growing up in Southern California in that time period, people were into everything, but mostly Led Zeppelin and all that. And I had an older brother, and my brother had all these records, and so I'd start listening to his records, and he had the Allman Brothers, and I don't know what it was about the Allman Brothers, but they were playing some blues, and so that when I heard that, I went, well, what is this? And they're live at the Fillmore East. Dwayne Allman introduces Stormy Monday. This is a T-Bone Walker song. Well, I said, well, T-Bone Walker? Who's T-Bone Walker? And that began the journey to find out who these people were, and to go to the record stores and thrift stores and find records and take them home. And just by looking at the album cover, it drew me in. And then I started playing these records, and then I discovered BB King live at the Regal. And from there, it just, that was it. And as soon as I had a driver's license, I was driving down to this place in Huntington Beach near me called the Golden Bear, and everybody played there. And I got to see Freddie King and BB King and Albert King and Muddy Waters and Buddy Guy and Junior Wells and Mike Bloomfield. Just any of the blues people that came through, I got to go see them up close, and it changed my life.
Tell me what that education was like to see these legends up close, to watch them play in a small venue, and to be, feet away from him, the great guitarists of our generation.
It was amazing to me. It changed my life. It was life changing. It was a epiphany moment where I just went, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm born to do. I have to do this. I have to understand what they're doing. I would watch them play. I'd go home and put the records on and take the needle off and try to find it on my guitar and put it back. And I just, it was a journey. It was literally a journey that I was on. That's probably not that different from other people that have been captured by music. And it does something to you. It's hard to describe what it is, but it speaks to your soul, and being a young teenager, it did. It spoke to me in a huge way. And, I think about it, and like my son, I can't imagine he would do any of those things that I did back then, because it's a different world now. But getting a driver's license in California, the day I turned 16, I was at the DMV to get my license. The day I turned 16. Nowadays, kids wait 3-4 years before they even get their driver's license. Well, to me, that was freedom. That meant something completely new, to have a driver's license and have a car to go and be able to see these people play. And that's what happened. I had a job. I was still in high school, but I had a job, and I bought a car. And of course, it was $200 back then. But $200 is still $200. And I bought that car, and I remember driving that car all over the place to see these people play.
What was that car? Because I get the feeling you must be into cars.
Yeah, I am into cars. I still am into cars. It was a 1962 Impala, Chevy Impala, like a lowrider, but it was beautiful. I bought it off of high school, my older brother's high school buddy, and he was the second owner, and it was absolutely. I mean, that car today is worth probably $40,000, but it was $200, and there was the freedom right there. For $1 worth of gas, you could drive pretty far back then. You get 3 gallons of gas and you could go. So I remember going to the Whiskey a Go Go and seeing people, seeing Johnny Winter, and I just, it was freedom to me to go and explore this music, and to get on this lifelong journey that I was to be on.
This, the playing of guitar and learning off records, did that come easy to you?
It came natural to me. I don't know if it came easy to me, but I was driven. I was determined to understand how to do this, and I practiced guitar 5 hours a day. I mean, I was disciplined. I was very, very disciplined. I just sat in my room and just learned how to play guitar. My stepdad immediately saw. He goes, you look like you're pretty serious about this guitar thing. Let's see if we can get you some guitar lessons. So there was a music shop downtown Anaheim at that time, and there was a guitar teacher in there. He was a young guy. He was probably 4 or 5 years older than me, had long hair, and was hip, and I go, well, this guy's great. So I started taking guitar lessons from him. He had a band and everything, and first thing he said to me was, we got to get you a guitar. This guitar is horrible. The strings are so high off the neck. I literally had scabs on my fingers, and my fingers would be like bleeding from playing this guitar. And he goes, no, you need a better guitar. So he had a friend who had a guitar, a Gibson, like a Melody Maker, which is like a student model, 3/4 size neck Gibson. Then I got that for $75, and I immediately went, oh, this is so much better to play. And so that accelerated my playing from just getting a better instrument. And and then I got a better amplifier, and then it just kind of went from there,
Was it always the blues?
Mainly, I would say mainly, it really was. I mean, rock and roll, uh, the people that were influenced by blues, I wasn't even really into the Rolling Stones so much, although I am now. But at that time, I didn't really. I just thought, oh, I'd rather listen to Muddy Waters and BB King and Howlin' Wolf, get it from the source, where they got it, So I started going and buying these records, and my older brother thought I was out of my mind. I would sit in the room and play these records. Sometimes he'd come home and there'd be nothing on but the stereo. You could see the light from the receiver, and I'd just be sitting in there listening to Howlin' Wolf, 15 years old. I'm sure he thought I was out of my mind.
At what point did you think you were a decent player?
Well, in about a year, I was able to get enough nerve up to go right down the street from me in my neighborhood was a house where all these kids after school would come and jam. There was a drummer there, and his brother played bass and guitar. And down the end of the block was another guitar player. And behind him was a guy that played. He had a Fender Rhodes piano. And down the other end of the block was another guitar player who was like, as kids, we were kids in high school. I was just barely going into high school. I was in junior high, and these guys were maybe a grade ahead of me. And I would see them hanging out at the local liquor store down at the end of my street, down the block. They'd be sitting in this bench behind this, drinking, RC cola and smoking cigarettes, just juvenile delinquents, really. And I thought, well, man, I got to hang out with these guys. And so I knew them from the neighborhood, but we didn't really know each other. And I told them I got up enough nerve, and I said, I play guitar. And they said, oh yeah, right, sure. So they invited me to come jam, and then they just thought, well, you really can play guitar. And I thought, okay. So I started playing with those guys, and we'd play parties. Back then there'd be hundreds of people at teenage kid parties, and as soon as their parents went out of town, we had a party. It was just pandemonium, and we would play, Chuck Berry and whatever else we could figure out that was easy to play, and that's how it started. And then when I got into high school, I started meeting other musicians that were, you know, I had to find a drummer, I found a bass player, and then we started playing, had a band. I had a bunch of bands in high school, and we just started playing parties. That's really how it started. The first nightclub I played, I think I was 18. Wild Man Sam's was the name of the place, and it's where the Runaways started
Hmm.
in Garden Grove. They kind of started playing there, and so it was like a big deal for us to go play there, And that's how it started. And I remember playing the Troubadour when I was 18, 19 in LA with the band that I was in, and it just kind of started like that. And that's then I met James Harmon when I was 21, and that really changed my life.
So how did that happen? Because I mean, obviously James Harmon is a legend in the blues. Um, I don't know what his status was at that point, but I presume he was probably a big deal. How did you wind up joining his band?
We had a mutual friend. I had a friend that owned a music store, and I would go in there and play guitars. He had vintage guitars, and used gear and stuff. And he was just a really great guy. And we became friends because it was in my neighborhood, and I would just go down there and see what was going on, say hi, play guitars, talk about guitars, and he goes, I got to introduce you to this guy. He's just like you. He dresses like you do. He's into this blues and stuff. You got to meet this guy. Okay, so we go to meet James Harmon. We go to this club where he was playing that night. We walk in, and I see these guys, and I just go, you know what it was like? It was like you were on a different planet your whole life, and all of a sudden you landed on the planet that you were supposed to be on. That's what it was like. And I walked in, and these guys are wearing, shark skin suits and got their hair slicked back, and just look like, you know, they just look cool and everything, and they're playing blues, man, just great. And they introduced me. I talked to him on the break, and he said, "Look, why don't you sit in?" So I got up and sat in, and I struggled to play the guitar that this guitar player had, and I was nervous, of course, but they were gracious to me, really gracious. And they said, "Well, why don't you come back tomorrow night and bring your own guitar and sit in, tomorrow night?" So I went home and kind of, discouraged a little bit, but the next day I just listened to records and practiced all day. And I got all dressed up as sharp as I could look. Man, I had pointed shoes and a suit and everything. And I took my guitar down there. And they called me up, and I sat in and I played with them. And I thought, well, at least I did better. And the next day, James Harmon called me, and I was living at my mom's house at the time. And uh, he goes, you sound good, man. Why don't you come over to the house and, we'll play some records and, hang out and talk and stuff. And I said, oh, man. So I went to his house, and he and Willie J, the bass player, ended up becoming one of my best friends. We played in the Thunderbirds together, and also the Mannish Boys and the Proven Ones. He was the bass player, and he and James were really tight. They were really close. James kind of mentored him, And so they were there, and hung out with them, and just kind of, started listening to records. James Harmon had a room with just records from the floor to the ceiling, just wall to wall shelves, with 78s on one wall and 45s on the other wall, and LPs that still said Jimmy Harmon when he was a kid. He would save his lunch money to buy these records. So it was just, it was like an archaeological discovery. And he would play me these records, and I didn't know about, because back then there wasn't CDs and the internet and everything else. So he just goes, well, this is Hubert Sumlin. He's the guitar player in Howlin' Wolf later on, and this is Elmore James, and this is all these different styles and different places. East Texas is the blues from there, and this is Lightning Hopkins, and so I just started listening to all these records, and he would make me cassette tapes, and I'd go home and just study them, and so I would just follow them around. I started going to their gigs and sitting in, and I'd be just sitting in the audience, and he'd call me up to sit in. I'd start sitting in, and the guitar player was getting really annoyed, and finally James just goes, you know what? I think you're ready to join the band. So I joined the band, and I just remember being just I just couldn't believe that I was getting paid. At the end of the night, he'd hand me money, and I just go, man, I'm getting paid to do this.
What was your confidence level like as a player at that point?
Not very good, not very good, but I have to say I persevered. I persevered because Gene Taylor was the piano player in the band, and at that time, Gene had already played with, he was Ronnie Hawkins. He played with Ronnie Hawkins in Canada. He played with Canned Heat. Gene was a seasoned, musician, and James obviously they were older than me,
Right.
and so I was intimidated, by not because they made me feel intimidated purposely, but I was trying to discover what I was, to find my voice in the music, and I was just kind of mimicking certain things, but trying to do it my own way, and Gene Taylor kind of was intimidating to me. I didn't realize that he was so almost blind, so he didn't see very well, but he'd be looking at me and sneering at me, I thought, but he just was just looking into space. So, I mean, then he left to go play with the Blasters, and then we got a couple different other piano players came into the group, and then uh, Bill Bentley, who was a friend of that we'd met in L.A., he brought Billy Campbell from Texas. He had brought him out, and he said, "You need to play in this James Harmon band." So Billy Campbell came. He moved in. James Harmon had an extra room. Junior Watson rented one room, and Billy Campbell was in the other room. And so we'd all get together and listen to records and play guitar and talk about guitar and drink beer and barbecue and everything. And Billy Campbell was still drinking. I don't know if you know who Billy Campbell is, but
I
he was a
don't.
he was a legend in Texas. He really, Jimmy Vaughn and Stevie Ray Vaughan, they learned a lot of stuff from him. He was an older guy. He was one of the first white guys to go play, in the black sections in Texas, and he played with Jimmy Reed and Freddie King, and he was an unbelievable guitar player. But he was a horrible drunk at that time. He had not cleaned up, so he would play like a genius for one set, and then the second set he was just like a wild Indian, man. He was scary, he'd look to sneer at me and everything, like he wanted to beat me up, you know.
Everybody's sneering at
Yeah,
you.
I was really, and I had to really, find myself, man, because otherwise I could have gave up and went home with my tail between my leg, and I refused to do that. So
But I'm curious when Hollywood Fats,
yes, he came in right after Billy Campbell.
but you were given the choice. Or if I understand it correctly, James Harmon asked you that he might come into the band, but it was totally up to you.
That's true.
How did you feel? If and then at this point, if you're not totally confident with your own playing, and to have somebody like him come into the band, what's the thinking? Are you thinking this is a good thing because I can learn off of him,
That's what
or
I
are you
thought.
totally intimidated?
No, I wasn't intimidated yet because I hadn't really seen Fats play. I'd seen him play one time. He opened for Muddy Waters at the Golden Bear. He and Al Blake played like just a duo, and that's really the only time I saw him. So I take that back. I did see him. I did see him his band play with Roy Brown and Lee Allen, and that was pretty amazing. So I had seen him play, but I didn't really understand how great he was. I mean, this guy had it all. He had it all. So to me, I was like, this is going to be a great opportunity for me to learn from this guy and to be in a band with him. And I wasn't confident enough to be the only guitar player in the band myself. Once Gene left, and then Billy Campbell. So Fats coming in was a great thing to me. And Fats was gracious to me. He never tried to intimidate me. He never, made me feel like I was inferior. He really helped me build me up. And he would take a solo, and he was like a force of nature. It could have been very intimidating as a guitar player to stand up there with him, and because he would take a solo, then the next turn it would be my turn to take a solo. Yeah. So it was a sink or swim type moment for me. And I thought to myself, I need to dig into myself and find out who I am, because I'm not going to be him. I'm never going to be Hollywood Fats. There's only one Hollywood Fats. I got to find out who Kid Ramos is. I got to find out my voice. And that's what happened. It happened over a course of time, but I was determined. I was determined.
How does that happen? Like, can you explain that? Like, first of all, explain to me when you said he had it all. What did he have, and what do you get out of seeing that?
He had all the different styles of blues. He could play all the different bags and all the different, when you say blues, it encompasses so much.
Mm-hmm.
And all the different regions are different. The music's affected by the region, by the people that moved there and where they came from. The Delta in Mississippi is different, and from Chicago, and Texas is different from Chicago, and California is different from Texas. They're all different. Memphis is different. He had all those styles. He could play any of those styles. And in the James Harmon band, a lot of the stuff we would make up on the spot, because we were playing like 3 sets a night back then. We were playing almost 5-6 nights a week,
Hmm.
sometimes 7 nights a week. Back then, it was a unbelievable scene, and so we were playing all the time. And so James Harmon would just go, "Hey, play it. Let's play this West Coast groove, or let's play it East Texas groove." And Fats knew just what to play, and then I would just watch to see what he was doing, and I'd find a part to play. Like if he was playing the chords, I'd play a bass line, or if he was playing the bottom, I'd play the top. And that's we developed a language between us and a style between us, and that is how that worked in the James Harmon band.
Does that happen just from listening, or is there a lot of discussion as to what each
It's
should be
mostly from
doing?
listening, and it's almost like telepathy. You know what I mean? It's like you're reading the other person's mind in some way. It's just it's a it's something you can't really describe. I think it's chemistry. A lot of it's chemistry, but it's just a knowledge of the music also, and by listening to the records, and you go, well, this part will fit on this, and you just have to figure it out. But playing night after night, hours a night, you figured a lot of stuff out. I mean, it's on the job training.
And is there a point? I know it's not one single moment, but is there a point when you look back and go, "I think I'm getting this. I know what I'm doing."
Yeah, because I would start to get applause. I would get the audience reaction, and I would feed off of that, and I'd start to go, okay, I know what this is doing. This. If I do this, I'm going to get this reaction. And you start learning things. You learn, not tricks, but you learn certain ways of playing, and I always played with a lot of passion and from the heart. I didn't have to have a lot of technical ability. I always was gravitating towards like BB King. He can play one note and it just makes you cry. It tears you up. It doesn't have to be a lot of notes. It's the emotion that's in it. You know, that's what music is, and that's how it relates to people is the emotion. That's what people react to, not, oh, this guy's technically, a fantastic, he can play scales like better than anybody. No, it isn't that. That's not what
Right.
people. It's on a primal level that people react to music. It's because it has some emotion that it transcends, whatever it is that's between people, language or barriers of whatever kind. It's like I say, it's almost primal. So when you play from your heart, that's what people react to.
So at one point or another, you leave the band. What happens at that point?
Well, I met my wife. We're still married, been married 37 years. And I just was tired of being on the road. I wanted to have a life, and start a family and to settle down. And, we were in love and we wanted to, have a family and make a home. And that just wasn't going to work, being on the road, driving around all the time. And I kind of got to the point where I thought, well, this isn't really going anywhere. And what am I going to do with my life? I was 28 years old, I think, when I left the band. So I left the band. I didn't stop playing because about right around that time, Linwood Slim had moved back to California from Minnesota, and he called me up because I met him with James Harmon Band. We'd been on the road and we were playing in Minnesota, Minneapolis, and he was the sound man at this club called the Caboose that we played at. And I remember my reverb tank stopped working that night, and he goes, "Hey, I got one. I'll lend it to you." I just met this guy, right? So we get in the car, and he starts driving to his house. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and I thought, I'm never going to survive this night with this guy driving. He was like a stunt driver. It was the craziest thing, and I thought, oh my God, man, this was a big mistake. And we get to his apartment, and he's like, wakes up his girlfriend. Yo, you gotta meet Kid Rom. This is Kid. No, don't wake her up. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. No, wake up. Come on. Trish the Dish. Well, that was his girlfriend. Her name was Trish. He called her Trish the Dish. He goes, no, you gotta meet Trish the Dish. So she's in bed, and oh, hi, nice to meet you. I'm so sorry. And he gives me the reverb tank, takes me back to the hotel, and he just lends it to me. So I, continued the tour we were on. I went back. It was probably a year later. He came back to California. I go, Slim, I still have your reverb tank. Yeah, okay, no worries. And me and him hit it off, and we became great friends, and we started playing together. And we just was just local, so I didn't have to go on the road. Although we did go to Europe a couple times. And then just from there, I started playing with Lester Butler before they got the record deal, the Red Devils. I played with them, and Janova Magnus called me, and I'd play with her, and Juke Logan, and different people would call me, and I'd go play. So
Can I ask you? I know the road is a necessity for some people and for some bands. But if you decide not to go on the road, how does that affect you as a player? Even if, like, whether you're playing the same amount but not traveling all the time. But if you're playing like 5 nights a week, living in California and not touring, does that change the way you play music?
I don't think so because I did that for a long time. I did that for years, and I would take one little road trip a year or something, but I wasn't like all the time traveling or playing 5 nights a week. I would play on the weekends, and I did that for a long time, and I don't think my playing suffered because I kept my chops up. I kept playing. If I would have stopped for years, maybe it would have affected me, I'm sure. But I never stopped playing. I never ever stopped. I was always working. Even when I got out of the James Harmon band, I started playing with different people, and then of course later on I joined the Fabulous Thunderbirds, and then I went right back to traveling again. And that,
Okay, so what was that like? Because you went back and you went back full force, like 200 nights a year or something,
yeah,
right?
it was crazy. I had seen the Fabulous Thunderbirds in 1977 or 78. I had graduated from high school, and a buddy of mine that I grew up with in junior high, his parents moved to Arlington, Virginia. So we would correspond with each other, write letters and stuff back and forth. And he kept telling me, "Look, I'm moving back to California as soon as I graduate from high school." That was his plan the whole time. Okay, great. So he graduates from high school. I graduate the same year. He sends me a plane ticket. He goes, "Come back here and drive back to California with me." I said, "All right." So I flew to Arlington, Virginia. He had work to do on his mom's house, and we did that. And one night, I'm looking through the newspaper. I go, "Let's go into Georgetown and see some music, live music," because he was a big music fan. And he goes, "Okay, what do you want to see?" And I say, "I want to go see Sonny Stitt, the great bebop sax player, was playing in Georgetown." So they live really close to Georgetown. So we went. I think we hitchhiked or so. I don't even remember how we got there, but I remember walking across the bridge across the Potomac River and going into Georgetown, and it was like crazy. Just these little tiny streets, walking around, and we never could find this club. Walked all over Georgetown. We couldn't find this place. And he goes, "Let's go over here to this place called the Bayou. Let's see who's playing there," because he'd been there. He knew the place. And I walked up in the front. It says, "Appearing the Fabulous Thunderbirds." And we go, who are these guys? The first record, I don't think it even came out yet. The one on Tacoma. And so, or Rounder, whatever it was, that very first record. So we walk in there, and there's the Fabulous Thunderbirds. It's Jimmy Vaughn, Keith Ferguson, Mike Buck on drums, and Kim Wilson. And another epiphany. I'm just completely floored, and I just go, "These guys are the coolest thing ever, man." That band was unbelievable. Jimmy Vaughn was like, he spawned I don't know how many guitar players and want to be just like him.
Well, tell me, as a guitar player, as a musician, tell me what you saw that made such an impression on you.
Well, he had style and he had a sound, he had a tone, he made the guitar fill up all the places it needed to fill up, but didn't overplay at all. He just knew where to put the notes in the right place, and the way he played rhythm and everything was just, it was greasy. It was great. It was fantastic. And Kim Wilson was a great harp player and singer, and I was just going, the whole band. I mean, Ferguson on bass, it was unbelievable. And then after that, I came home and I found that record just came out. I bought that record and I started trying to learn that stuff. And I'd go see them every time they came to California. I go see them. I saw them at the Golden Bear. I saw them at the Whiskey a Go Go. I saw them at a couple other places. And then, I met Kim when I was with James Harmon Band, and he sat in with us one night at the Belly Up and stayed up on stage the whole time. He didn't get off. He stayed up there. So we hit it off, and I didn't really stay in touch with him, but when that gig came available, um, Kim called me and said, "Yeah, we're looking for a guitar player." So I went to see them. They were playing a local club here in California, and Kid Bangham was playing guitar. Duke Robillard had left by that time because they were in the band together for a period of time, and then
Right.
Duke left. So it wasn't happening or whatever. So Kim asked me to join the band. So I talked to my wife about it. This is a big deal. I had a job, and my first son was very small, and she said, "Well, I think you will regret it if you don't do it." So I said, "Okay," and I went to Bearsville Studios in New York. They were recording "Roll of the Dice" with Danny Korchmar producing it, and I went and played on three or four songs, I think, and everybody was like, "Yeah, this is going to be great." So I joined the band. That was it. And then I think shortly after that, that record came out, "Roll of the Dice," and we played like 200 dates that year. So I went right into the frying pan.
And what did that feel like to you? Because even though you had toured a lot before, it probably wasn't the same
No,
as.
no, they were playing. We were playing much better places. We were playing, arenas, and we did a tour with Joe Cocker and Buddy Guy, and we were playing big places outside, and we played with all these rock bands, from the '80s and stuff, and we traveled in a tour bus and flew everywhere, or in the tour bus and stayed in nice hotels. It was obviously better than what I was accustomed to, and so it was great, but it was grueling.
Yeah, I don't think people realize just how much work that is and how difficult it is to be on tour that long.
Oh, it's rough. You come home and then you're home for 3 or 4 days and then you're gone for another 4 weeks. And I mean, it was rough. It was hard on my wife and my son, I'm sure. And then, when my wife was pregnant with my second son, I almost didn't make it back. He was born by the time I got back because we were in Long Island and I couldn't have been any further away in the United States. And it was like, you got to come home. He's going to be born. Okay. So, I got on the plane. It was, by the time I got home back here, it was 11 o'clock at night and he was already born. So, it was a process where I was like, I'm going to just not be a good father or husband. I can't just be gone like this all the time. This is not going to work. And I just remember saying, I'm done. I'm done doing this. And and then all I just kept playing, obviously, but I wasn't traveling like that. I came back. I can't remember what I did right away, but I played with Slim. I played, festivals around here. Went to Europe at least once a year. Played festivals. I kept it going. And then I had a band that I played with called Los Fabulocos, and I did that. And Randy Chorkoff started that label, Delta Groove, and of course I started playing with those guys in the Mannish Boys, and so I mean, it was just things change, but they stay the same.
I wondered that young kid at 14 or 15 and thinking, this is what I want to do. Do you know what it was that you wanted to do? Like, was it touring at the scale of the Fabulous Thunderbirds, or was it just playing gigs on a regular basis like you did when you stayed at home?
I think it was touring with the Fabulous Thunderbirds. That was the pinnacle of it for me. I think they were not at the height of their popularity, but it was right after that. So it was
Mm-hmm.
still there was still a lot of notoriety. It meant something to be in that band, and it's a great band still. I don't mean to demean it. It's just different time period. That's all I'm saying. But yeah, it's that's really what I wanted to do, is to be able to perform in front of a lot of people. And I remember we played with Carlos Santana. We were on right before him, and I'm up there playing, and Carlos Santana standing on the side of the stage watching me play. And it was just it was surreal to me. I as a Chicano kid growing up in California, you know that's the Mexican national anthem. Way como va, man. That's like, you got. If you don't know that, you couldn't play any local bands out here. It's so, and from there, he, I stood on stage and watched him, and there was a point in the set where his drummer and organ player went into this long solo, and he walked over to me and gave me a hug, and in my ear he said, "You play from the heart." And right there, I thought,
Wow.
you know what? All that I've done since I'm 14, 15, I've accomplished it. It's actually happened. It doesn't. I don't have to do any more or be any more famous in my own mind or whatever that means. I've accomplished what I set out to do.
That's fantastic.
It really is.
When you talk about the Chicano background, how do you relate that with the blues?
Well, the people I grew up with, that I went to school with, that were Chicanos, they listened to oldies and blues and R&B. That's what they listened to. All the other people that in my school, they listened to different Led Zeppelin or whatever else they listened to. But the lowriders, they had that thing, man. They listened to all the cool music. It was, and I knew all these guys in high school and they just had style, man. They had a different thing. And blues was something they understood.
What do you think it is about you that, when you think about the people you've played with, whether it be the James Harmon Band or Fabulous Thunderbirds or Roomful of Blues, the Mannish Boys, the Proven Ones? I mean, you've been in some pretty decent bands over the years. What is it about you that puts you in those positions of playing with bands like that?
Well, I don't know. I'd like to think it's because I'm a guy they can get along with, and they like the way I play. I mean, being in a band and traveling with people, you see the worst in somebody. You do. You'll
I'm
see the
sure.
worst in somebody's personality when you're traveling and you're tired and you're hungry. and you want to just go lay down somewhere, and you'll find out the worst in people. You really do. So I I'm able to hang. You know what I mean? I'm able to hang out and not be somebody that you just hate. You know, I think that says a lot because when you're on the road with people, you have to be able to get along, and sometimes it's hard. It's really hard. You know, plus you got to be able to play in all kinds of different situations. You know, you got to be able to play when you don't feel like it. You got to be able to get over it. The audience paid to see you. They're coming to see you, and you may be having a really hard time up there. Like you can't hear things the way you want to hear, and you don't. You're tired and everything else, but you still have to have some kind of level of proficiency that they don't. They don't recognize it. They don't see it. A lot of times we'd say, "Well, we fooled them again." You know, that's like a joke. You know, it's, the
Well,
nights you think you're playing great, they don't get it. Then the other nights you think, God, I sucked. I was horrible. Man, you sounded so good. I'm like, okay, thank you. That's all you can say.
what's your favorite part of playing music?
I think it's the it's like an emotional thing where you're creating on the spot and a spontaneity that you it happens just like magic almost. You know, when it's everything's working the way it's supposed to and you're firing on all cylinders and everybody's playing great in the band and you can hear each other really well, you just have magic nights where you go, all these other horrible nights, I don't care because this makes it worthwhile, you know.
Okay, tell me about playing with your son.
Oh, that's the greatest thing ever because he's so he's like me in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways he's not. He's a unique person. He's his own self, but it's just like I get to see myself in a lot of ways how I was starting out, you know. But he's better than me. He's got more different things going on. He has that singing voice, you know, that I never had that, you know. I mean, that's the greatest thing, you know, to be able to sing, to tell a story, you know, and he sings with so much emotion and he's just a great guy to be around. We have so much fun too. We laugh and we have a great time. I've been on the road with him quite a bunch. You know, I'm taking him to Europe a couple of times, and we're actually going to play in Switzerland this November coming up, the Lucerne Festival, and it's going to be great. And I've got to record with him, and I get to see him grow as a person and as a musician, and it's just inspiring because you never stop. You know, I mean, you don't ever stop as a musician. You don't ever stop. You know, growing and perfecting what you do or just getting better at it to where it's more cerebral. I mean, you don't think about it. It's not cerebral. It's the opposite of cerebral. It's coming from a place where you're not thinking about it, you know?
I wonder when you decided to follow music seriously. I presume your parents must have been very supportive because of their background. I presume you feel the same way with your son following his dream of playing music.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I never tried to push him into doing this. I would never do that. You have to have a passion for it. You have to want to do it. It has to be something you have a passion for. There's no way you can do it any other way. And all I've ever done is try to encourage him to be happy. Find something that makes you happy and do that. You know. Uh,
But do you tell him about the difficulties,
oh
the
yeah,
trials and tribulations of
yeah.
the music industry?
I've told him, and he's seen it. You know, he's seen a lot of my friends, and he knows a lot of because I've told him. You know, but he's very into it. And, you know, he's very sharp, and he understands a lot of stuff. He gets a lot of stuff. He's like an old soul. You know, he gets the music, the movies. He gets all that stuff that people his age don't have any idea about. You know, my wife and I brought him up. He's learned about all the cool stuff that we know about. You know, the point of reference that we have. You know, it's it's just it's culture that a lot of people don't have these days. You know, especially young people, they don't have it. You know, but he does. He has it. You know, tons of it. So he has all those points of reference, and then he has all the new stuff that he knows about that I have no idea about. So, you know,
Tell me about the new album.
so you know, I've been a Christian for I don't know how many years, but you know, I just I have my heart, I have this heart for God and the things of God. And I met this man, this pastor, I went to church with him years ago, and he went out and started his own church, and he's still faithful to that calling. And he called me up and said, "Hey, do you want to make a God record?" That's how he approached me. And I said, "Yeah, sure. I never have done that." And he goes, "Look, this is my ministry. I'm promoting musicians that I feel have something special about them, and I'm paying for everything. I'm just going to hand it to you. You do whatever you want with it." So I had a lunch meeting with him and his partner who produces stuff with him, Chris Lazat. And we sat down, and Johnny, my son, was with me, and we had lunch. And they started telling me that, basically this idea that he has to do this, just to support musicians and take his money and put his money there. And he had a budget and had an idea in mind, and he had a studio that he liked to work at. And I said, okay. So I called Brian Templeton. Brian's, he's a believer like myself, and he's a soulful guy, and we're like brothers from another mother together. We in the Proven Ones, and he's come and stayed at my house, for a week at two at a time, and we've done shows out here, and I've gone and stayed with his house. And so, we have this idea of doing stuff together for sure. And so I said, "You want to do this?" And he goes, "Absolutely." So I put the rhythm section together. Stephen Hodges, played with Mavis Staples for 13 years, and Tom Waits, and he was in the Thunderbirds for a short period of time with me as well. And Mike Turturro, bass player I play with in the 44s. And Brian brought in Dave Lamina, who's unbelievable organ piano player. He plays with Ronnie Earl for the last 13 years, and he's the dean of keyboards at Berklee School of Music in Boston. So
Wow.
this guy is an amazing. I never met him before until we made this record. And Brian goes, "No, we got to have Dave Lamina." And I said, "All right, Brian, you say so. Whatever you say, man, I trust you." And he was right, 100%. So we just put it all together. We went to this little tiny studio in San Clemente. And when I walked in, I went, "Oh, wow, this is really small." And I was thinking we'd be in different rooms or something. No, we're playing all of us in this one room and no headphones. We're going to play live. And we have this little speaker in the room, and the singer is going to be in the room with you singing through this little speaker, and you'll be able to hear him. Okay, I trust you, John, the engineer, John Schreiner. And he's like, "This guy's a genius." In this place, there was chords everywhere. It was like, man, I hope this guy knows what he's doing. But man, did he know? He just got the sound. I think he's like one of my favorite new engineers. He's a genius. So we pretty much did all that live. We were definitely live. All of it was live, but we did it in 2 days, basically.
Tell me of the songs.
So, strange things happen. And there's Sister Rosetta Tharpe song. We did some Mahalia Jackson, the Soul Stirrers. We went back to the old gospel, Southern soul gospel stuff. And then Brian wrote a couple songs, Answer for Isaac and uh, No One But the Lord. And we just picked the material. Brian and I picked the material together. We had one rehearsal at my house with Dave Lamina on my piano at my house here, and then we just went in and did it, and it just gelled. It was just magical, really magical.
It's interesting to me because when I read your history, this is not the first time that somebody has approached you to make an album, right? Like, and I don't know if you're known as a producer, but the Floyd Dixon album was also another one where somebody said, "Hey, would you
Yep,
be the producer of this album?"
correct. Yeah, I don't know. I produced my evidence records, my three evidence records too. I produced those, and the Floyd Dixon thing was what a beautiful opportunity that was to get to know Floyd and to play with Floyd. He was a wonderful human being,
And
and
this
what a
is a
talent.
person you didn't know beforehand. Somebody
No,
said,
I didn't know him. I didn't know him at all. Bob Auerbach reached out to me and said, we have a mutual friend, and he says that you would be great to produce this record. So I had lunch with Floyd and Bob, and we talked about it. And I told them what my idea was, and they agreed, and everything happened. Just things happen for me in certain ways that they just fall into place to where it was like, well, it's meant to be. it's like just meant to be because everything happened for a reason and all the pieces came together perfectly. And that was one of them, the Floyd Dixon project. And he died like a little over a month after we finished it. It was really. I think he knew he was dying already. Bob knew it, but I didn't realize how sick he was. But yeah, it was an unbelievable thing. And the first time we rehearsed at Bob's house, I brought Larry Taylor on upright bass and Richard Ennis, and I had this great horn section. And man, we start playing this Floyd Dixon song because those guys know Floyd Dixon. They know those records. They've listened to those records like I had. We know that music. We know how to play that music. Well, he didn't know us from anything. And we started playing, and he stops and jumps up from the piano bench. He goes, "You guys know how to play." He couldn't believe it. He was like just like a kid. I told Bob, I said, "Listen, Bob, when I put the right musicians together for this, he's going to be inspired." And he was. He was completely inspired. And it was one of those things. It was a God thing. To me, that's what it is. It's like divine intervention.
When you say the God thing and the latest album, was God always in your life? Was that a big part of
Oh yeah,
growing
God.
up?
God was always in my life, even though I wasn't in God's life. I mean, God was there for me, even though I didn't realize it, and a lot of times in my life. But that's how God is. He's there from the beginning, and He's always there, even though we don't acknowledge it. He's there. We have to make the effort, to just reach out, and then there he is. So that's how that happened for me in my life, and I look back now, and there's so many times where God intervened. I mean, I've had some horrible health issues where I went through cancer and all that, and that'll change your life for sure. I mean, God sustained me through all those things. It was the grace of God that kept me alive.
But is it correct to say that that was one of the reasons why you reached out to him more so than others, or were
Yeah,
you?
yeah, because you find in your weakness, God's strength is made perfect. That's where you really realize the strength of God is in your own human frailties, your own weakness. Having cancer and I was a big, strong guy, and I didn't realize something you can't even see can bring you to your knees like that. And I'm fortunate to be alive because of what I went through. It was rough. It was really brutal. And God sustained me through it. It encouraged me and it made my faith stronger because you realize you have no control over things. There's things you have absolutely no control over, and you have to have faith that otherwise I don't know how you get through them. You know.
I wonder, other than the faith, did that experience change you any other way?
Yeah, it did because you realize your own basically your own immortality. You realize you're not here that long. If you live 100 years, it's not long, really, in the scheme of things. You look at history. I mean, you probably close to my age. I mean, we've both lived through 2 centuries already.
Well, I did my research, and you're actually 10 days older than I am.
That's amazing. Well, we remember the 20th century, and now we're in the
Right.
21st century. So yeah, I mean, you don't you go, well, yeah, I'm not going to be here that many more years, I don't think. So whatever I get is what I get. But you realize it's over so quick, and you have to make things count, and you have to realize that you really are on limited time.
Did making this album, was it different because of that?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was special because I'd never made a gospel record that, I always dedicate all my music to God, and I always put, thanks to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I've always put that on every record. But to actually make a record where the songs are glorifying God, although, Chris Lazat told me, he goes, you know what, when you play guitar, you're bringing glory to God. He said, all the music you've done has brought glory to God. And I thought, well, that's a nice way of looking at it. I never thought of that. And so, but this was really special, and it's created a new friendship with Chris Lazat that I didn't have before, and I've performed with him at some churches now recently, and it's really a blessing to do that, and just to get to know this guy who's just really a soulful person, I mean, iron sharpens iron. So you attract people to you, and people are attracted to you by we have a common thing that runs through us.
Oh, it's interesting that, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, you met Brian Templeton not too long ago, and that
Exactly.
was almost by accident.
Yeah, it was. We had gotten together, and Sugar Ray Rayford was singing with us, the Proven Ones, before we named it the Proven Ones. My good friend Willie J. Campbell put together a New Year's Eve gig in Missouri, where he lived, and so we brought Ray in, and Anthony Geraci and Jimmy Bott and myself and Willie, and then we got these horns, and we put the show together, and it was really great. And we're like, rehearsing at Willie's house, and we're saying, "Hey, we got to do a record. Let's do a record, and we got to keep this going. This is great." We played in the Mannish Boys together, but the Mannish Boys was a conglomerate of different people that came and went. It was Finest Tasby and Johnny Dyer and Bobby Jones, all these different singers, and then Ray, of course, came in, and that was my first meeting with Ray. And so by the time we did this New Year's Eve gig, Ray's career was taking off. He had his own band. He was traveling, and he goes, "Yeah, let's make a record. This would be great." So Jimmy Bott has this fabulous studio at his house in Portland, Oregon. So we all flew into Jimmy's place, and we made this record. Well, Ray just it seemed like he was preoccupied. He was distracted. So he didn't really finish the vocals. He just kind of did not have his heart and soul into it. So we had all these tracks we recorded, and a lot of them were just, tracks. And so we needed a singer, because Ray goes, "Well, I don't think I'm gonna be able to do it. I got my own band." And so we tried a few different singers out, and then Anthony Geraci had met Brian Templeton back and did some stuff with him, and knew him from, I guess, the Radio Kings, and also, Jerry Portnoy. He was singing with Jerry Portnoy, and so we heard Brian sing. We sent him the tracks, and he sang on some tracks, and we all went, "This is the guy. This is the guy we have to have in the band." He was so great. We were like, "How come we never heard of this guy?" We never knew about this guy. We was mainly on the Boston scene, although he'd been traveling and stuff, but we just weren't hip to him. So Brian flew back to Portland. He finished all the songs with Jimmy Bott. Then the first gig we had was the Waterfront Festival in Oregon. Huge festival, thousands of people. And I'm sure Brian was like, "Oh my gosh, this is my first gig with these guys." And so he flew out there, and we did that show, and it was just great. And we all just hit it off fantastically. And so we went from there, and then, of course, we did the second record, and then Willie got sick, and he got ALS, and of course he passed away from it. So COVID happened. We put that second record out, and COVID happened, like right in the middle of putting it out. So that kind of tanked all of that. So it's just funny how things work out.
Well, both you and Brian sound great on the new album.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this. It's always nice to catch up with you. I really appreciate you doing this.
My pleasure. I will definitely remember you this time.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Appreciate it.